Hey, John, how are you today?
Hey, Elliot. Good, thanks.
Just this morning, Transparency International issued their Corruption Perceptions Index for 2020. I know you're familiar with the index. It's an effort by this organization to create a way to look at public corruption on a comparative basis with countries around the world. And so part of the way they do that is they use a number of data elements. I think it's 13 different types of surveys and things like that. And they come up with a way to combine all the scores and then rank the countries. And so New Zealand and Denmark were have the least lowest perception of public corruption, according to the index this year. They have scores of 88 on a 0 to 100 scale. And Somalia and South Sudan were the lowest. There were 180 countries, I think. So they had scores of 12. So I'm assuming you saw that.
Yeah, and interesting. Obviously, the focus was the response to COVID-19, which makes it obviously all the sense in the world. And the notion of corruption in healthcare, how that could not just risk losing lives, but it affects the economy, and as we know in the country, social justice and that sort of thing. I think it's been out, I think, since 2012. They've been doing this index, and I think there's enough metrics there to make it a pretty valuable assessment. Those of us that are in the sort of compliance community, it gives you an understanding, at least on the public side, what areas where there are gaps, and what areas need improvement besides just a list of countries. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And again, the focus being on the COVID-19 response makes all the sense in the world.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think you are right. I think it is 2012, and they have worked very hard to keep their methodology consistent. So you really, so they can and other people can do compare, year-to-year comparisons, trend data. So how did the U.S. fare in this?
The U.S. came in at the number was 67, which is the lowest it's been since, I believe, 2012, and no surprise, in large part because of the inadequate, to say the least, response to the pandemic by the government. I think there's no question. And I go back to the summary, which makes a broader statement besides the U.S., and I thought this was interesting and worth repeating. The emergency response to the pandemic revealed enormous cracks in health systems, democratic institutions, and underscored that those in power who hold government purse strings, often serve their own interests instead of the most vulnerable. And that is just so true. And they close by saying, as the global community transitions from crisis to recovery, anti-corruption efforts must keep pace. So it's not just a response to the medical issues, which are obviously massive, but anti-corruption. And they come up with a series of recommendations which are not overly dramatic, but are certainly logical. And there's 4 that I see here. Strengthen the oversight of institutions. I think, of course, that makes sense. Make sure the resources are there. A broad goal of defending democracy and promoting civic space because of, obviously, the violent reactions in many countries, including our own, of groups. I just saw yesterday in your own lovely state of Wisconsin, which I consider a second state for myself, having gone to school there, that the legislature passed a anti-masking, or they overturned the masking requirements that had been in place. So, we still have insanity going on in some of these places, but that's, promoting civic space. The other 2 recommendations were to ensure open and transparent contracting. And obviously we've seen from talking to our friends in law enforcement, some of the fraud committed by those that are pretending to be charities or pretending to sell PPE, that sort of thing. And then publishing relevant data, guaranteeing access to that data. Pointing to our own country, we know that Florida sort of jiggled the books, if you will, in terms of data. And so if you don't have the right data, you can't make responses. So I think, again, those 4 recommendations are relevant here in our own country and obviously elsewhere around the globe.
Yeah, I would encourage people to go out and take a look at this. Be really easy to find, but it's at transparency.org, and it was posted this morning. They have it's a very comprehensive look. They also look at the globe by regions, so you can look at the Americas or East Asia, Western Europe, things like that, to really see how areas, trading groups, other slices and dices really show up. And the recommendations tell us that while COVID is obviously a huge medical challenge for the globe, it's had rippling impacts that are far beyond traditional healthcare.
I'll end with this. There's a line here that I couldn't say any better. They say their research shows, quote, that corruption continues to undermine democracy even during the pandemic, so unquote. So obviously corruption is a key issue for us in the AML world, and it just shows how it impacts adjacent areas, including healthcare.
Yep. All right, John. Good talk. Talk next week.
All right. Take care of yourself. Stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.